Baal Choveinu, Shemot Chovotenu, Koneh Kol Haaretz, Lahapei Shedudatenu, Matir Asurim Behema Va'adam, Hamachniach Hamas, Miyadeinu Shachreram, Verakaztetu kan, Tzidkoteinu, Verakaztetu kan, Tzidkoteinu. Yada-rai-rai, yada-rai-rai, yada-rai-rai-rai-rai-ram, yada-rai-rai-rai-rai-rai-ram. Verakaztetu kan, Tzidkoteinu, Verakaztetu kan, Tzidkoteinu.
Happy New Year, Temple Beth Shalom, and thank you to Cantor Hirschhorn for inviting me to be with you today. First of all, the Torah says we're a nation of priests. The job of a priest is to intercede with God on behalf of others, through ritual, through prayer, through whatever works. How are you all feeling today? Are you up for that big task? Because we have a lot on our plates now, we human beings, epidemics, threats to democracy, and the biggest, climate change. One is scarier than the next. I want to get into some of that scary stuff, but first I want to ask you to consider a lighter question. Have you ever wondered why our New Year's in the fall? Many cultures celebrate their New Year at the awakening of spring or in the heart of winter. This month of Tishrei, which is packed with holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchat Torah, is not even counted as the first month according to the Torah. That distinction belongs to Nisan, the month of Passover, while the month we're in now is the 7th month. And there's even more to this story. You may have heard that the Jewish calendar actually has 4 New Years. The animals, the trees, the Jewish people each have their own separate New Years. We like to say in the liturgy that God finished creating the world on the day of Rosh Hashanah, that the Tishrei New Year is the New Year of the planet. But our rabbis couldn't even agree on that. Some said the first day of Tishrei was the day when creation was finished, but some said the first day of Nisan was the day. So what's up with autumn? What's up with having a 7th month New Year? I'm going to dip into ecology, specifically the ecology of Canaan, and the Sabbatical year to understand a little about this. If you spend time in Israel and Palestine, you might have experienced that the rain doesn't fall in the summer. The first rains start around Sukkot, the last rains end around Passover. Our ancestral region of the Middle East, set between mountains and deserts, only gets rain through the winter. If it doesn't rain then, there will be no water for crops for the entire year. No rain in winter means famine and starvation. Deuteronomy waxes eloquent about a land that drinks water from the rain of the heavens, watched over continually by the eyes of God. It sounds warm, even cuddly, but what it means is that God is always judging whether or not the people merit rain. And that's what our ancestors wanted, a relationship with God where the feedback about how they were doing came swiftly and clearly. It wasn't that way in Egypt, where the nation of Israel was forged. The flat land bordering the Nile can be watered by foot-pump irrigation, no need to rely on the heavens. And it wasn't that way in Mesopotamia, where Abraham came from, where the Tigris and Euphrates, the 2 great rivers, provides water. Hilly Canaan can't be threaded with rivers that water the terraced hillsides, gravity being what it is. Perhaps strangely, that was what our ancestors loved about it. Here's why they loved this. Mesopotamia controlled its water completely, the opposite of Canaan. At least it did until their irrigation made the water table rise and brought salt to the surface of the soil. That wasn't the only problem either. Their wealth brought a demand for wood from forests that didn't grow in the land between the 2 rivers. They denuded the mountains whose thick forests stimulated the rain and gentled the rivers, and actually made Mesopotamian agriculture and civilization possible. So Mesopotamia, one of the greatest technological civilizations the world has known, inventor of writing and the plow, had already died out by the time our ancestors dreamed of eking out a precarious existence in Canaan. On a mythic level, our stories teach something similar about Egypt. Not only did the Egyptians completely control irrigation, but Pharaoh completely controlled the Egyptians and the Hebrews through a vast system of serfdom and slavery. Control, breeds more control, which breeds injustice. And the injustice of the system brought on 10 plagues, including plagues of the river itself. The message taught and learned from these stories, trying to take control of nature, trying to overrule divine oversight, was both morally and physically deadly. Our ancestors wanted to be in a place that was the opposite of that, where they couldn't control. That seemed to them like safety. There's a systems way to think about all this. Technology, like the technology of irrigation, defers the consequences built into nature. For example, irrigation may mean there's enough water when there isn't enough rain, but it can also mean the land runs out of water because the aquifers run dry, or the soil runs out of fertility because salt is blooming on the land. Once that happens, it's already too late to fix anything. A civilization dies. The people that can move on to other lands. Sounds kind of like our reality right now. We've deferred consequences for now centuries. And climate change is when they all come back at one time to us. And it is too late to fix it. It's not too late to mitigate it, we hope. The difference is that in past ecological cataclysms, civilizations locally were wiped out, but people could move to another land. It's our whole planet at stake right now. Moving to another planet isn't an option, at least. And anyway, this is a really great planet. So our ancestors understood this thousands of years ago. They understood that being situated in a land that might not have enough water, being in a place overseen by a God that judges, paradoxically, they saw that it was right to enjoy that divine judgment, to seek it out. In a way, that's what we're doing on Yom Kippur. We're seeking out that judgment because it's unlikely that the entirety of the creation of the whole universe is keyed to the cycle of this earth around this sun. Forget about when in the year we celebrate the new year. We key our celebration of the universe and our idea of judgment according to that cycle of the earth around the sun. Because everything is keyed to how we live in the world. Everything is keyed to how we get filled by the world. So we believe that once a year on this trip around the sun, whatever season it happens in, we're going to get judged. And clearly, since God isn't judging the entire universe based on this one planet's orbit around its sun, that's something we're seeking out. We're asking God to judge us today. We create that reality because we need it. And our ancestors understood very well why we needed it, because we need to live in a loop of divine feedback that teaches us to live sustainably on the earth. And that's what the Torah says again and again, Uvacharta b'chaim, choose life, l'ma'an tichyun, that you should live for the sake of living. And it says choose life for all life. It doesn't say just choose life for yourself or for your family or even for your people, but it says choose life, capital L, capital I, capital F, capital E. Give everything capitals, why not? So when do you think New Year should happen? In a place like that or in a planet like this? Is it better for it to happen during a quiet time or a tumultuous time? A time of safety or a time of danger? A time of turning, of shifting, or a time of stability? We know what the Torah and Tanakh and the Rabbinic Judaism and its interpretation of those teach about those choices. Pray and pour your heart out right when you're praying to God for God to pour out abundance upon you. Right when you're at that transition point, that turning point, when the season of rains begin, when everything is at stake. Pour out your heart right at the moment when the book of rain is being written and sealed. But that's a bit of a feint. Yom Kippur is not actually the time for rain. And certainly Rosh Hashanah is not yet. The time we really pray for abundance, when we pray for God to pour out God's abundance, is on Sukkot. It's on Hoshana Rabbah. It's when we shake a lulav like a rain wand or like a cloud divining rod, asking for the rains and moisture to come from all directions to replenish the soil. So why isn't our New Year on Sukkot, on the full moon, when the rain should be starting? And why isn't it the first month? Here's a simple explanation for why we begin these prayers on Rosh Hashanah and then Yom Kippur before Sukkot. I think it makes sense. We are praying on this day of Yom Kippur to be ready to pray, to be ready to ask for the rains. And Rosh Hashanah and the whole 9 days leading up to now, we're preparing us to pray, to be ready to pray. We don't come before God to pray for blessing and rain and abundance without first doing teshuvah, without first turning and transforming and changing and refining ourselves. Why? Because a people who has done teshuvah already has God's ear, already has appeased God's judgment, is already living in a prayerful way, and is able to ask for what it needs with a whole heart. So on this day, we are coming together as a people to mend our hearts, to be whole so that we can ask God in full spirit for what we need. It's not just for us, and it's also not just for the land of Israel. Obviously, we're living all over the world, and we're here to ask for prayers on behalf of the whole world. And it says this many times in the Yom Kippur prayers. A people that has done teshuvah truly is ready to act as priests on behalf of the whole world. We're supposed to be a nation of priests. So that's what we're doing here today, preparing ourselves to pray for the whole world, for its health, for the abundance of species and diversity of plants and animals, soils and clouds and air. All those prayers are right there in our Sukkot liturgy. They're right there. We don't have to make them up. In beautiful piyutim, poems we say during the circle dances that we call Hoshanot, that we do while we're carrying our lulav and etrog. Most of the time, people don't translate these piyutim, these poems. Let me tell you a secret. You can write your own piyutim. You can write your own Hoshanot. Call and response prayers for all the life and beauty that is endangered in our world. We have beautiful poems, but we also can make more beautiful poems. My website has some that I've tried out and share with people also, neochassid.org. Okay, enough about my things. The biggest thing of this day is to wish you welcome to the Shmita year, the seventh, the sabbatical year, when the Torah says that the land will rest and people will live in equality with each other and even with the wild animals. What better year could there be to pray for all the animals? What better year to pray for the land, for the plants, for the ecosystems, for all the lands, for the whole planet? Especially now, after the report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. The report had no surprises, truth be told, except one, which is to tell us, yes, it is as bad as we thought it might be. Everyone who understands the science knows to be very afraid. But Shmita isn't a time of fear at all. It's the exact opposite. People who are afraid don't share their food freely. People who are afraid don't open their gates to the wild animals. People who are afraid don't eat from the land without worrying what they're going to plant next. Shmita is our time to regenerate our relationships with each other and with the land, relationships based not on how we can use each other, but on how we will live together. It's a time to live in the moment of this reality. And this reality has threats, it has dangers, and also, despite all this, we are surrounded by beauty. The picture behind me is not where I'm sitting at this moment, it's nighttime, but this is the tree in front of our house that we tap for maple syrup. I never fail to walk past that tree and feel inspired. I guess I have a bigger relationship with that tree than any in my whole life. So Shmita is an antidote to fear at the same time that it's an antidote to what we're doing to create climate change, or more properly, global climate disruption, which is what we're talking about. Because it's not just that it's changing or that it's warming, it's that all the systems are disrupted, so there's no stability. In order for ecosystems to thrive, they need stability, or at least they need a window of stability. And that's what we're depriving life of with our technology, which are deferral of consequences of actions again and again and again, so that when all the consequences hit us, as they are starting to do, we're going to get, 500, 1,000 years of consequences all at once. That's why our ancestors wanted to keep Shmita. That's exactly what our ancestors were trying to avoid. Let's get the consequences for this year right away. So going back to being priests for the whole planet. Half our mission as a holy people, if we can get to that state of being holy, is to pray for everyone on the planet, every nation, every species, every ecosystem. It's kind of serious work. And the other half of our mission is to create a society where we can live out the Shmita year, where each of us can lean and loaf at ease, observing a spear of grass for a whole friggin' year. It's kind of serious, but it's also a lot of play. It's important to remember, Shmita isn't just once every 7 years for a whole year. Actually, every single week, we have a day that we take off to practice doing Shmita, to practice releasing, called Shabbat. That's what it means for Shmita to be called, a Shabbat Shabbaton, a mega Sabbath, the Sabbath of Sabbaths. Yom Kippur is also called a Sabbath of Sabbaths. In fact, there's a deep connection between Yom Kippur and Shmita year, between being in the presence of judgment and being not afraid, but willing to stand forward to judge oneself, and the joy that comes from simply living in the moment and playing, because the line between the two is actually not great. I feel like I could come in for a landing right now, but there's one little bit of Torah I want to share with you, which I found remarkable. It's about the Shmita year. It comes from a Hasidic Rebbe, Kalonymus Kalman Epstein. And what I want to share comes from his book called Ma'or V'Shemesh, which means light and sun, a nice title for a book when we're thinking about climate change. He notes that in the description of the Shmita year, there's actually two different descriptions of what's going to happen. The first, right at the beginning of Leviticus 25, is says, whatever will grow up from the land in the year of the Shmita, which is called Sefiach HaSadeh, will be for you and for your family and your servants and your employees and the stranger living with you and for the wild animal that is in your field. And it implies that what grows naturally without being forced by human cultivation will be enough for everyone, more than everyone, because it also includes the wild animals. And then a little later, it says, if you ask, what will we eat in the 7th year? What will you eat in the 8th year? Because in the 6th year, you're not going to harvest in the 7th and you're not going to plant for the 8th. God says, I will give you a blessing for 3 years so that you won't have to worry. So in one case, we're eating what grows naturally by itself in the 7th year. In the other case, we're not relying on the 7th year produce at all. We're going to get 3 years at once. And what it's describing is actually two different kinds of realities, one in which we're worried about the future and not living in the present, and one in which we're fully in the present. And he says, if we can live in that fullness, which he describes as a state of complete teshuvah, complete fixing of our actions and deeds, just being in the right way, in the right place. If we can do that, then the earth will return to its fecundity that it had in the Garden of Eden. And in that case, we will live the 7th year as a time of essentially a return to Eden. And if not, God will give us an extra blessing in the 6th year to make sure that we have enough. But interestingly, and this reflects also what we were saying about Canaan before, it's not a good thing to get that extra blessing from God. What's good is to live in a way where you don't need that extra blessing, because you bring forth the fullness of the earth by the way you live. That's what we're trying for. That's what we need to do. How we can do it, this is a constant exploration. We're going to be trying to figure this out for many decades and perhaps centuries, but we have to keep at it, and we can. So we are facing today the problem, many centuries in the making, that every time we improve our technology, we imagine or pretend that we can hold back the negative forces or consequences of nature. But we bet that the next technological advance will erase the negative repercussions of the current technological advance. So we're always robbing the future to pay the present. You know, we all know that's not the way to live. Shmita is like taking the present and using it to pay into the future. Yom Kippur also has that quality. You know, at the beginning of Yom Kippur, we take Kol Nidre and we say all our vows are annulled. The Sephardim say from last year to this year twice, and then they say all our vows are annulled from this year to next year. So the Ashkenazim only look forward to the future, but the Sephardim, which is where my tradition mostly comes from, we look back to the past and then to the future, and we detach the day of Yom Kippur from both past and future, because a vow is something that connects a past moment to a future moment. So if you eliminate vows, you're eliminating anything but the present, which is where we are. And the funny thing is, being in the present enables us to pay our attention, our mind, our heart forward into the future, so that we're not robbing the future to pay for the present, nor are we robbing the present to pay for the future. We are being in the present in order to give of ourselves, to become something that lives into a better future, a good future, a future of justice, a future of holiness. There's too much to say, but I don't want to forget to come back to the question of the seventh month. So seventh month means the month of completion, because 7 is a symbol of completion in everything we do. We have the 7th day, we have the 7th month, we have the 7th year, and of course the Jubilee year, which is the 7th year. Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur is actually the end of the cycle, before the next cycle begins on Sukkot. It makes sense for it to be the 7th because it is that time of completion, as we move in to the time when we pray our hearts out for the sake of the earth. So I want to return to one more idea that's in the Ma'or V'Shemesh, in this comment about Shmita year that we were discussing. Kalanimus Kalman references a midrash that says the earth didn't bring forth the kinds of trees that God commanded, because God commanded that there should be fruity trees making fruit, and the earth only brought trees making fruit. He says the earth sinned on purpose out of compassion for human beings, because the earth knew that humans were going to sin by eating the fruit that we shouldn't eat. And so the earth wanted to be an ally for human beings in this process of teshuvah. The earth wanted to provide a place on which humans could stand once they had lost their original place. And that loving compassion of the earth is something that we need to give back. And what he says is, if we give that back, that full compassion, then the earth can return to where it was as well. Shana Tova, a good year to all of you. Shanat Shmita, Metukan, Umitakene. You should have a year of Shmita that is both sweet and healing. May we find healing from this epidemic. May we find healing in our hearts to make space for the refugees that are coming. And may we live the best lives we can live for us and for the sake of all life. Blessings and be well. Shalom, shalom, shalom.